Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this informational session on Albemarle County Public Schools' proposed transgender and gender-expansive policy. My name is Helen Dunn. I'm the Legislative and Public Affairs Officer for Albemarle County Public Schools. And joining me are Ross Holden, the School Board Attorney, and Lars Holmstrom, one of our division's equity specialists. And again, we're very grateful to everyone who's watching tonight. We hope that we'll be able to address the vast majority of questions that have been submitted to us thus far. But please, if you'd like to submit any further feedback, questions, comments, please do feel free to send them to transgenderpolicyfeedback@k12albemarle.org. And we'll have that email address scattered up on the screen periodically so that you can see it and write it down if you need. Additionally, we'll be posting an FAQ on our website by this Friday afternoon. So please do feel free to take a moment and read through that information there and reach out if you have any further questions or concerns for us. So tonight we'll be providing some context, some reason for our proposed policy on the treatment of transgender and gender expansive students. We'll also provide the legal basis for some of the details of the policy and more information about some of the beliefs that are held in our community, as well as responses to those, so that we can provide a further avenue for your feedback. And there again, the transgender email address, transgenderpolicyfeedback@k12albemarle.org. And we will post this, Zoom meeting, we'll post a video of this, a recording of this by tomorrow morning. So anyone who'd like to see it later for reference is certainly most welcome to do that. And before we start, we're just really excited to announce that our school board recently approved a new strategic plan for the school division. It's called Learning for All. The vision that it proposes that will lead our school division now reads: our learners are engaged in authentic, challenging, and relevant learning experiences, becoming lifelong contributors and leaders in our dynamic and diverse society. The mission says, working together as a team, we will end the predictive value of race, class, gender, and special capacities for our children's success through high quality teaching and learning for all. We seek to build relationships with families and communities to ensure that every student succeeds, and we will know every student. Values are equity, excellence, family and community, and wellness. And to facilitate all of these, we have strategic goals of thriving students, affirming and empowering communities, and equitable, transformative resources. And if you'd like further information about the strategic plan, that is also posted on the k12albemarle.org website, and we invite you to take a look at that and to inform yourselves about that strategic plan and its development. So at this point, I'd like to pass it over to Lars Holmstrom, who will speak to you a little bit from his perspective as a division equity specialist.
Yeah, thanks so much, Helen. My name is Lars Holmstrom. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a member of our equity specialist team under Assistant Superintendent Dr. Bernard Hairston in the Office of Community Engagement and Empowerment. During the next few moments, I'll share a bit on the need for this policy in our division and the aims that we're hoping to achieve. Before we get started though, there are a few terms that we'll see and hear throughout this presentation, so I'd like to take a moment to define them here first. So the policy itself contains a glossary with many terms, and they're useful to know if you're interested in this topic. I encourage you to take a close look yourself. Now, we're not going to use all of them here, but you will hear these 4 terms repeatedly, so let me take a moment to clarify what we mean when we use them. The first term is cisgender. Cisgender is a term that a person might use to describe themselves if their gender identity corresponds to their assigned sex at birth. So for example, if an individual is assigned the sex designation of female at birth, has female reproductive organs, and whose gender identity is female, that person may identify as a cisgender female. The second term is transgender. This is the policy on the treatment of transgender and gender expansive students. And a transgender is a term that a person may use to describe themselves if their gender identity or gender expression is different from their assigned sex at birth. Third term is non-binary. Non-binary is a term a person might use to describe themselves if their gender is not exclusively male or female, including those who identify with a gender other than male or female, as more than one gender, or as no gender. Finally, we have an umbrella term. The term is gender-expansive, and this umbrella term is an inclusive term which acknowledges that people may exist at any point along a gender spectrum. Rather than a gender binary, where there's just male or female, people exist at different points along that gender spectrum, and the inclusive term that we're using at this moment to capture all of those folks is gender-expansive. These terms are on the move all of the time, and so we do our best to update them respectfully. We won't always succeed in that regard, but we'll try to stay up to speed in our work. The final thing I'll say about terminology is that just as a general rule, and really not specific to the topic of gender at all, we prefer to let people identify in ways that feel true to them themselves, rather than assigning them a label or providing a limited forced choice whenever that is possible. All right, can you advance this? Thanks so much, Helen. So I'll talk about why this policy is important first. And really the bottom line is that we want to create a safe and conducive learning environment for all students. But as a community, we have some work to do to gain the knowledge and skills necessary to create those safe and conducive learning environments for transgender and gender-expansive students. So what you see here is an excerpt from Policy AE, our division goals and objectives, and it states our intent. And so I'll read it with you right now. The school environment should be responsive and conducive to learning. The physical environment facilitates and enhances the learning experiences available to each student. A responsive environment includes competent, dedicated teachers using a variety of techniques and a classroom atmosphere where students can function and develop according to their abilities. Safety, physical comfort, and appearance also are vital environmental components. So that is our intent, that is what we believe in, yet we know that schools are often not safe spaces for transgender and gender-expansive students. How do we know this? It's a fact which has been well documented in schools across the country. This is one of the reasons that you'll see schools across the nation considering policies like this one at this moment. GLSEN is the national leader in tracking these statistics and has done so on their school climate survey yearly since 1991, both nationally and for individual states. Among the many data points collected in the 2020 survey, you can see that transgender students are 8 times more likely to feel unsafe than their cisgender female peers, and 40 times more likely to feel unsafe than their cisgender male peers. Those are in clear contrast to our intent here in Albemarle County Public Schools. This is not just subjective either. This is verified by a number of organizations right down to our own government. And so the statistics are confirmed by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. They collected similar data in 2017 and reported that transgender youth are far more likely to experience violence victimization, such as bullying at schools at a rate of 2 times the rate of their peers, and being threatened or injured at a rate of more than 4 times that of their peers. Also, transgender youth are more than 5 times more likely than their cisgender peers to attempt suicide. Just very startling statistics that we must respond to. So locally, we're not yet prepared or well prepared to track this kind of climate data quantitatively. The state of Virginia did recently add a preferred self-described gender option to our climate survey data, but our use of the survey and our process for interpreting the results is still emergent at this point. However, there's no reason to believe that we're exceptional to this national and state data. In fact, feedback from our gender-expansive students and their families does confirm the need for this policy. I'll share with you here just a few comments from students and families who are looking forward to the positive impacts of this policy on their school experience. This is from an ACPS parent who states, as the parent of a non-binary child, let me assure you that what I want is the same as what every parent wants. For my child to grow up to be a happy and fulfilled adult, but mostly I want him to be safe. This policy will safeguard the lives of all children, not just the transgender and gender-expansive youth, because when you create an environment that sees, respects, and affirms all, you create an environment in which every child is free to be exactly who they were born to be. I'll read 2 more. This is a joint statement from some ACPS high school students. They've said, Being trans and gender nonconforming in a binary world is exhausting. Being viewed and called something other than what you are every day is exhausting. School can magnify these issues exponentially. So making sure trans and gender nonconforming students feel comfortable, respected, heard, and valued is critical to helping us feel safe and happy with ourselves. Finally, we have this comment from an 11-year-old ACPS student. The student says, being non-binary, this policy will make me feel safer and free to express myself at school. This policy will offer me support and help teachers understand how to make their classrooms more accepting of all kids. I don't understand why some people don't want me to feel safe and secure. I have as much of a right to learn at school as anyone else. So clearly, we feel that there is a need for this policy. And I'd like to pivot a little bit now and talk about how we believe the policy will change these outcomes that we just reviewed. So the policy itself has 5 stated goals, and I've arranged those goals here into what we'll do, how we'll do it, and what the outcomes are that we hope to achieve. And the specific language here again is important, and I would encourage everybody watching to read it closely for yourself and share it and talk about it too. Get to know the policy if you're interested in it. However, I've also simplified it here for this introduction. So Helen, if you'll advance us once more, the policy goals said simply are that we want to reduce marginalization of transgender and gender expansive students, increase inclusivity for them, and protect their privacy. We want to do all that mainly through professional development and implementation of practice shifts. And we want to do that in order to create that safe and conducive learning environment where all students can participate regardless of their gender. Now, it's important to note that while I've listed professional development goal as the primary how goal, there are also some structural, procedural, and practice changes that are named throughout the policy, which will elaborate on how we'll achieve our desired outcomes. I'll name them briefly, and then Ross will elaborate on them a little bit more. So let's dial in and talk just a little bit more about what discrimination and marginalization looks like for these students. So we know that marginalization occurs. Let's just understand a little bit more about what it looks like. Marginalization, of course, can come at the hands of peers. And we know that bullying cuts across all social and cultural lines, but it's far more pronounced for certain populations. Gender-expansive students are one of those populations. And I want to point out here that that marginalization also comes at the hands of adults. And this can be passive, as in the case of adults that do not intervene when gender-expansive students experience discrimination. But it can also be active, as in the case where adults use language or practices that erase or even marginalize or discriminate against gender-expansive students. Finally, students report that standard policies and practices of schools are widely identified by them as contributing to unwelcome and unsafe learning environments, everything from classroom policies to bathroom and locker room access, names and pronouns, so on and so forth. So what is our plan? How is it that we move forward? What does it look like to create more inclusive environments? Here are some of the efforts that are not just named in the policy, but these are already in place in some of our schools. And we feel very confident that these practice shifts will lead to safer and more conducive learning environments for our transgender and gender expansive students, because we already have positive feedback from students on which classrooms and schools fit these descriptions and how students feel within those classrooms and those school spaces. So here's an overview, and then Ross will elaborate on some of these a bit more. So we want to, and in many places are already in the habit of consistently addressing gender harassment and bullying for transgender and gender expansive peers as equal to other forms of bullying and harassment. We'll use accurate names and pronouns. We'll eliminate gender segregated grouping where it does more harm than good. It's a practice which is common in classrooms, and particularly in elementary classrooms, which serves no instructional purpose. And we can eliminate it much or most of the time. We'll provide non-stigmatizing access to bathroom and locker room facilities. We'll talk much more about that one in a bit. We'll ensure curricular representation and inclusive instructional practices. We want to be sure that transgender and gender expansive students see positive representations of themselves in the classroom. And we'll work closely with students and families to create plans that respect privacy, increase safe and healthy learning environments. Again, these are in place in many places, and we're confident about the positive impact that they have on our students. But it's going to take some time to address them more universally. So I want to talk a little bit about how our community is learning. And I mentioned that professional learning is a key feature of that path forward. We've known about the need for this learning for a long time, and we've begun to partner with local organizations to engage with this learning. So the organizations that you see listed here, namely Side by Side and He, She, Ze, and We, these are organizations, the same organizations that help the state of Virginia draft their guidance on the treatment of transgender students in Virginia public schools. The previous slide mentioned partnering with families as one of the key strategies for creating more inclusive environments. And I want to point out here that a key partnership we're developing is with an organization dedicated specifically to supporting families at all starting points when their children come out as transgender or gender expansive. We've also begun to develop our own capacity internally to lead this work ourselves. And our own diverse educators are working to lead the learning that's called for in this policy. Okay, so both I and Ross will address a couple of misconceptions that have been out in the community and have been about, and we just need to spend some time with them here and hopefully bring some clarity to them. There's a couple themes in the feedback that we're receiving, and those themes show up in the media more generally around Virginia as schools seek to follow the state guidance by the beginning of the 2021-22 school year. I'll just address two of them here. The first misconception is that it's the default position of ACPS when a student comes out to actively hide that information from family. That is false. In fact, ACPS does not support educators to actively hide information from families that they have a right to know according to board policy. We'll always seek to balance parental rights with student safety. The policy outlines that when a child comes out as transgender or gender expansive to an educator, the educator will work to create a plan with the student. The school will always look to develop that plan in such a way that the family is included as fully and as soon as this is deemed reasonable to do so through conversation with the student. We do know that the healthiest path forward is when the school, the student, and the family are all in transparent dialogue with each other and working toward the same ends. The second misconception that I'll address here is around the question of non-stigmatizing access to bathrooms and locker rooms. Again, both locally and widely, we've seen the concern that these policies will result in boys using girls' bathrooms in an unsafe way. Certainly, this would erode that safe and conducive learning environment for students that we're seeking to establish. So there are a couple of angles to unpack on this one, depending on the specific concern or misconception that folks have. In one case, folks are concerned that bathroom usage will be unmonitored in such a way that would lead to the free use of boys or girls in the bathroom designated for an opposite gender, and that folks using the bathroom that way have the intent to not simply use the bathroom, but to engage in some sort of mischievous or dangerous behavior. And of course, that would create an unsafe environment, and we will always work to prevent this. But the real question is, how do we distinguish between a boy or a girl using a bathroom with ill intent from a transgender or gender expansive student that is simply using the bathroom consistent with their gender? And the answer to that question lies in the plan that we'll develop with the transgender or gender expansive student about which facilities they're comfortable using, our communication with teachers whose classrooms or paths of travel are nearby to that facility, and just general education on the topic with staff. There's another case that I should address here too that's related. And some folks are concerned that their own child will be uncomfortable with the presence of a gender expansive or transgender student in their bathroom. We want to communicate that single stall gender neutral bathrooms are for those children too. In fact, designating specific restrooms really specifically for transgender or gender expansive students alone would have the effect of creating a stigmatizing environment for those students. And that's something that we want to avoid. Again, our goal is to create safe, conducive environments for all students. One final point I would say about this before I pass it along is that, the access to non-stigmatizing bathroom and locker access, as it's described in this policy, has actually been in place for several years in some of our schools. And because during this time, the fears have just not materialized, we haven't had the types of concerns that folks are widely raising. We feel confident about this one as well. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to our school board attorney, Ross Holden. And Ross is going to walk us through the legal basis for this policy, as well as some further details on the key provisions of the policy. Ross?
Ross, I believe you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Lars. So my name is Ross Holden. I'm the school board attorney for the Albemarle County Public Schools. And my presentation is going to consist of two parts. First, I'm going to briefly describe the legal basis for the policy, both under Virginia statutory and federal case law. And in addition, we'll review the key provisions that will help ensure that transgender and gender-expansive students are integral members of the school community with the same rights and benefits available to all students. In 2020, the Virginia legislature passed a statute in the Virginia Code that requires each local school board to adopt a transgender policy prior to the start of the 2021-22 school year concerning the treatment of transgender students both in primary and secondary schools. And the policy needs to be as broad as, and at least as comprehensive as guidance that's been published by the Virginia Department of Education. And of course, the statute requires the VDOE to publish that, promulgate that guidance, and we utilize that to create our own policy for the Albemarle County Public Schools. So you'll see there are 8 categories that the law requires us to address, and you can see them up there, but I wanted to point out a few of them specifically for a couple of reasons. One, we've in the school division have already had school board policy addressing a lot of these issues, and the purpose of this policy is just to assure that they apply consistently and equally to the gender expansive community. Prevention of and response to bullying and harassment. That's been prohibited by school board policy for a long, long time, even with gender identity, which was a revision made several years ago. But this will just enforce that understanding that applies to gender expansive students. Maintenance of student records. And I'll get into that in greater detail later. But this is also an issue that is being part of the school division for a long time, required by federal law. And we'll get into the specifics of that momentarily. Protection of student privacy. Parents are going to understand that the school has an obligation to maintain confidentiality of student information under federal law, under state law as well, and we'll consider that as well. And last, and Lars has already raised it, but I will want to expand on it legally, is the use of bathrooms and other facilities consistent with the students' consistently expressed gender identity. I know from listening to public comment that a major concern of parents is the use of biological sex segregated bathrooms by gender expansive students. That issue was specifically considered by federal courts in Virginia in the Grimm versus Gloucester County School Board case. Recently, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, and Virginia is part of the Fourth Circuit territory, ruled that a school board policy excluding a transgender male, it's a a biological woman transitioning to be a male from the boys' bathroom violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, and also constituted discrimination on the basis of sex in violation of Title IX. So what it means is that a student cannot be deprived of the right to use the bathroom of the gender with which a student consistently identifies. Most recently, less than a month ago, the United States Supreme Court denied the school board's appeal in this case, and as a result, the decision in the Grimm case is established law in this jurisdiction, as I've just described. Just briefly, the model guidance published by the Virginia Department of Education is comprehensive. Our school board policy aligns with that completely on issues of privacy, confidentiality, access to activities, and use of facilities of transgender students. I want to transition now to an overview of the key policy provisions. I'm going to just discuss a couple of the goals. Lars, more eloquently than I could, described what they are and the reasons for them. But on the next slide, you'll see that the major goals are set forth. And I want to point out three of them that I think are most critical. First, we need to eliminate ways in which gender-expansive students are stigmatized and diminished. We want to make sure that the rights of gender-expansive students are recognized just like the rights of all other students in the school, to encourage the integration of gender-expansive students into the entire school community. And as Lars aptly pointed out, we are going to provide training to staff to assist them in addressing these matters arising under the policy, and to make sure that the policy is applied in a safe and consistent manner with respect to all students. Let's talk a moment about privacy and confidentiality. The policy conforms to the requirements of the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, also known as FERPA, that our school board policies already address. So if there is a plan on how a transgender student should be treated in school, that should be done in a confidential and private manner. We want to make sure that the child has equal access to school programs, activities, and is protected from gender-based discrimination in the classroom. However, that said, we want to make sure that we are aligned with the the rights of parents in this regard, so that we will honor the student's request for confidentiality, especially as part of the school plan on how to treat the transgender student, but will advise the student that aspects of the plan may not be implemented without parental approval. And that means that we would like to engage in a dialogue. We would like to help if we can, if it's available to us, and if both student and parents would like, offer our good offices and resources to help address some of these difficult issues, resolve them for the good of not only the transgender student, but the transgender student's family and the classmates in whatever school the transgender student is attending. There's been some suggestion that, and they're mistaken. So this is another one of the misconceptions that Lars raised earlier, but a suggestion that schools will be required to report to the Department of Social Services, report parents who don't agree with the ACPS transgender policy. And I want to tell you that's just not so. The policy does not require anything of the sort. Virginia Code Section 63.2-1509 identifies school personnel as mandatory reporters only if they suspect child abuse or neglect. The draft transgender policy that we are describing for you this evening does not modify that threshold that the Virginia Code establishes in any way. With respect to names and pronouns, preferred pronouns, the student will be permitted to assert the name and gender pronouns that reflect the student's consistently asserted gender identity. And we'll ask and have the school staff address the student in the way the student would like to be called, by name, by pronoun. However, if the parents of an underage student who makes such a request object to it, the school will follow the parents' directions in this regard. That said, as we indicated earlier, we would like to bridge the abyss to the extent it exists. And therefore, we want to help offer whatever services we can provide to help families and students address these pertinent issues with respect to gender identity and resolve them as best as possible for the sake of both student and family. School records, there are two different kinds. It's a dichotomy here, and I want to make sure that we describe what they are. First, there are official permanent school records, registration documents, transcript. Those records have to include the student's legal name and gender assigned at birth. However, there are also other documents in the school that are not part of the permanent file. I'll give you a couple of examples. Yearbooks, graduation programs, school newspaper, a program of a musical or play. In those situations, the school would use the name and gender that the student uses, prefers, and consistently asserts in school. With respect to the documents that we already have, a birth certificate on registration, or another court order that we may have, we cannot change the permanent record without some modifying court order or a different birth certificate that may be prepared, and issued, that will change the sexual identity, gender identity, and the name of the student. So if there's a new birth certificate or a court order, the school will make those changes to the documents. And that will be to students who are all enrolled in our schools and attending schools now, but also for students who may have graduated or otherwise no longer attend an ACPS school. So if a former student 10 years from now has transitioned from a biological male and now has a new birth certificate identifying that former student as with a different gender, we will have to make those changes in the school documents. But only if we have the court order, only if we have a new birth certificate. That's a requirement not only of Virginia statutory law, but it's also a component of the Grimm versus Gloucester County School Board decision that I discussed earlier. Here's another misconception. So I want to make clear right at the start that the draft gender-expansive policy applies only to physical education and intramural sports. I've heard comments that the policy is going to allow a biological male to play in an interscholastic team, interscholastic women team, and that is not so. All interscholastic athletics are governed by the Virginia High School League or other similar organization. And so those teams, the interscholastic teams, have to follow the policies and rules of those entities. So our school board policy does not address that. Virginia High School League has its own regulations that can be consulted, and our policy goes no further than allowing a student to participate in physical education or intramural sports in the manner consistent with the students' gender identity. The restroom and locker room access, I think Lars has described that pretty well. I've explained that this is also required by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals holding in the Grimm versus Gloucester County case. School personnel will make available to any student, transgender or cisgender, reasonable alternatives in a non-stigmatizing manner to any student who requests them. So if a gender-expansive student wants to use a gender-neutral bathroom and ask the school for that accommodation, the school is going to grant the request. Similarly, if there is a cisgender student who is just uncomfortable sharing a sex-specific bathroom with a gender-expansive student and seeks another accommodation where that student would have more privacy, the school is going to accommodate that request as well. So I want everyone to understand that this is really legally required, but it's a way that we can address the concerns of any student who seek more privacy in using the bathroom and other similar facilities. Briefly, I'll address some gender segregation in other areas. Basically, one of our goals is that we want all students, transgender and cisgender, and everyone else, to participate in school programs, activities, extracurricular activities, class trips, in accordance with a consistently asserted gender identity. We want to be able to have the ability of students to dress the way they want. And frankly, our school board policy already contains a student dress code that does not require stereotypical clothing that you would expect, or that in the days gone by, you would have a biological female wear a certain type of dress and a biological male have another type of dress. Our policy just requires that people dress appropriately, that they don't wear clothing that may extol drug use or promote violence and things of that nature. But our school board policy, as it stands, does not require biological boys and biological girls to dress in particular and different manners. So in actuality, this policy causes very little change in that regard. With respect to other activities such as choir, extracurricular activities that traditionally have had male and female organizations, we're going to look at those issues and issue further guidance in that area as we go along. I don't think bullying and harassment, we just don't allow it. School board policy doesn't allow it now. We have prohibited any type of discrimination, harassment, or bullying based on race, color, national origin, religion, gender identity, disability, and any other characteristic protected by law. Nothing is going to change under this situation. Any complaint specifically related to bullying, harassment on the basis of gender identity is going to be treated in the same manner that complaints of this type have been treated in the past under current school board policy. This policy just reinforces the notion that we are going to be vigilant in assuring that students of all gender identities have a fair and equal shot at school programs and activities. And last, the school division is in the process of developing a training program that will help staff understand the requirements of this policy and address issues that will arise in the normal course of school operations. We've mentioned a lot of these along the way. Strategies of communicating with students and parents about issues related to gender identity, how to prevent bullying, including cyberbullying, which of course is a major concern to school divisions all around the country at this juncture. training on federal and state laws that address the students' right to privacy and confidentiality and to a safe and secure educational environment. We want to foster a gender-inclusive environment for all students, and our policy, the training that we will prepare under that policy will be intended to focus on those particular issues. But make no mistake, school board policies, not just this draft policy, if it is approved, but all policies are binding on school division staff, and we fully expect all staff to adhere to the provisions of school board policy as they have for many, many, many years here. So with that, Helen, it's back to you, and to have any final thoughts and instructions for those kind enough to have listened in. I thank you for your time all.
Thanks so much, Ross and Lars, for those presentations and those further explanations for our community. And I just want to thank the audience out there again for joining us tonight. We're always deeply grateful on the side of the school division for the engagement of our wonderful community. And I hope we've provided the reason for this proposed policy, as well as legal basis for it, and any other information that might be useful to this community. Just a reminder that we will be posting this recording by tomorrow, sometime probably early morning. Additionally, we will have an FAQ up by this Friday afternoon for further reference for those who'd like to engage with that and seek further information. And again, we do have an email address that is dedicated just to this. It is transgenderpolicyfeedback@k12albemarle.org, and it's noted there on the screen. And so please do feel free at any time to send messages to that email address, and you will get a response quickly. And so thank you to everyone for joining us this evening, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the night.
Thank you, Helen.